Welcome to the Sacred Art of Joking. I'm James Cary. I'm a BBC sitcom writer and author of a book called The Sacred Art of Joking. And it is my belief that the Bible is much funnier than it first appears. In fact, if you're not finding any of the Bible funny, I don't think you're taking it seriously enough. So in this series, I'm speaking to a number of folk who are Bible fans and comedy fans and comedians to find out which bits of the Bible make them laugh out loud. And my guest this time is stand-up comedian, writer, Pause for Thoughter on BBC Radio 2. It's Paul Kerensa. Hello, Paul.
Hello. I don't know why I saluted. I've never saluted in my life. I thought this would be a good time to start.
Well, Zoom is making us do weird things because now we end meetings sort of waving at each other, don't we?
Exactly. It feels like the end of an old sitcom, tying in with comedy. It's like, you've been watching.
You have been watching. That's right. What a great way to finish every Zoom meeting. I've described you as stand-up comedian, writer, Pause for Thoughter. Have I left anything off that list?
Oh, well, probably, but only things that I don't know that I'm doing yet, because in this crazy new world, which is sort of gradually transitioning back into the old world, but reluctantly, I think we need the new world. New jobs need to be discovered and in the creative arts as well. It's like anything goes at the minute, obviously. So I always come back to comedian and writer and a bit of radio stuff. But within all that, I seem to wear about 12 different hats. And, so the writing means writing for other people, of course, but also trying to write my own pipe dream stuff as well. So, but I always come back to comedy and I always come back to faith things, really. So, yeah, comedy, Christianity crossover is always something that intrigues and interests me.
Cool. Well, we'll get on to why that's often an unhappy alliance for lots of people, but not so much for us, obviously, because we've literally written the books. There's yours, there's mine. But what I'd love to do, yes, that's right. You need to sort out your bookshelf.
I do.
We'll dangle one from that lamp in the background there. I'm just asking everybody, what part of the Bible makes you laugh? You've had first dibs, really. So what have you gone for and why?
I'm a sport for choice, obviously. It's a laugh riot in there if you read between the lines massively. But I've gone for my all-time favourite, not just all-time favourite in terms of humour, but in terms of bits of the Bible. And that is Matthew 7, Sermon on the Mount kind of stuff. I wanted basically the plank in the eye. Let's trim it just down to that. It's a plank in the eye. And instantly, planks are funny anyway. You look at the Eric Sykes film, The Plank. I'm not sure if that's exactly what Jesus had in mind when he was talking about it, but it's exaggeration and it's a use of humour in telling a story. And I think particularly relevant to the Sermon on the Mount, you can't hold a mount without a bit of humour and a bit of crowd control. And it's so easy for us to think that this crowd turned up and this sermon spewed out fully formed and marvelous. Well, of course it was fully formed and marvelous, but to everyday people, they're followers who follow this guy for a while. There are new people, there are passers-by, they're a bring a friend. I've done gigs for years with all of those shapes and sizes of that audience, and yeah, your fans might like what you're saying, but the bring a friend who's been dragged along needs convincing. And I think Jesus' manner of speech at speaking to people and meeting them where they are in their working world, the fact that his dad's a carpenter, is the family business. And then he says, I'll read it. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite. First, take the plank out your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. And you can imagine either gales of laughter or gasps of astonishment at the truth bombs that have just been dropping on them.
Yeah, there's a modern day version of that because we're not so into carpentry as they were in those days. Although we're standing in front of shelves, but they've all been made in factories and assembled at home. That's not really carpentry, is it? But the modern sitcom equivalent is somebody covered in cream, or like a trifle, and then saying to somebody else with you've got a bit of cream, just there. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that is the picture, isn't it?
Yeah, timelessly funny, and it works. Then it's exaggeration. It's about relationship, isn't it? I don't think anyone really is ever funny it's very difficult to be funny in isolation. You know, even if you are a one person talking, you are talking about relationships and talking about that person compared with that person. And that's what he does there. The fact that we don't laugh out loud as we read it, I always think, you know, you look a Shakespeare comedy, people don't laugh out loud at that. That's 500 years old. This is 4 times as old as that. You know, there is BBC radio comedy from the 40s and 50s and 60s that it's, you know, you listen to the Goon Show and it's tricky sometimes to pick up on all the jokes. Even an 80s sitcom, a 90s sitcom, some, you know, laughs. Even last year, Little Britain was being reanalyzed and going, well, actually, 10 years ago, we were in a different place comedically. So 2,000 years ago.
As in, we can't broadcast this now.
Exactly. Do we content warning? Not sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, taste of humour change. You're not going to laugh out loud in the same way, but it doesn't mean we can't appreciate that there's a use of humour here, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, just to put it into context, this is the Sermon on the Mount, isn't it? And this is the Blessed are the Cheesemakers moment as well. I love the idea, as you're saying, that Jesus is preaching to all comers, you know, people who've been following him, you know, oh, he's really good, you know. And it reminds me also, there's, in fact, I've got next to my book there's Stuart Lee's book there, where he talks about going to, when he does a gig, he'll say to half the audience, look, half of you don't even want to be here because somebody's dragged you here and you're not going to like it. You know, he completely owns the fact that the audience is completely mixed in that, which I think is good. And so I always think it's not just the fact that Jesus is trying to win the crowd, because he's obviously got divine authority to do that as well. But it's like, if he doesn't explain stuff humorously, he's not using all of the tools of A, literature, and B, humanity. The fact is, the world is comic, isn't it? And so for him to describe it in a way that is never comic is actually not a good description of that world. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, there are some books on this. There's a nice little book, which is hard to get hold of, called The Humour of Christ. And I always mention it because the author's name, have you got it there?
No, I haven't. I've got a similar one. It's not, I was looking, it is the same. It's not. No, which is your one? Yeah.
The author's name is Elton Trueblood.
Nice.
Never tire of that name. And
good name.
You sound like you should be writing Gothic fiction with a name like that. But anyway, he says, if you're not open to the possibility that Jesus is joking, quite a lot of what he says isn't actually going to make any sense at all. And although I don't always agree with his assessments of that, it's only 100 pages, but it's a really interesting book. Then I think I think quite often we just assume that Jesus isn't joking. And I don't think that's a very helpful, because he's really sassy as well. Here, for example, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but straight after the passage that you've just said, he said, you hypocrite. He's calling people hypocrites, which is actually quite a bold thing to do, because in a way, he's opening himself up to criticism. I mean, the first verse of Matthew 7 is, do not judge or you too will be judged, which is usually people's way of saying, don't judge me, I've done a terrible thing. Who are you to say? And so Jesus is, if you're the one saying, don't judge, who are you to say? And then calling people hypocrites. It's like, okay, well, let's have a look at you. You know, that's quite a bold thing to do. But also he then goes straight into the kind of so firstly, he's then saying, once you've taken the blank plank out of your own eye. I love the fact that it's basically a plank routine. I think that's really funny. I've never really spotted that before. Yes, exactly. It is completely. Planks funny in all times in history.
Absolutely. Can't go wrong with a plank.
Can't go wrong with a plank. Yeah. But then he says, once you've taken the plank out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. I mean, ironically, your brother may also have a different plank in their eye. But he's not saying you can't judge. But he is saying you need to take a long, hard look in the mirror first before you start. I mean, and in a way, I think this is a message we need to hear now, isn't it? Because despite the fact that the religious people are meant to be the judgy people, and our society has decided, well, we don't want any of that anymore, thanks. We're quite judgy now, aren't we? The cancel culture is very, 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 very judgy. Is that
absolutely
fair?
Oh, definitely. I think it's and this is why it's, you know, not only is comedy timeless, Jesus' message here, of course, is timeless. It's as you say, it's not like we've learned our lesson exactly. And not just the judging part of the cancel culture. Things like, I don't know whether the Good Samaritan is the most told parable. It feels like it is. I know certainly when we do Pause for Thought, we're often told, just don't do Good Samaritan again. We did it last week. Just give it a week off.
A buzzer goes off when you say Good Samaritan.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yeah.
Because you look, and partly because you're often doing stuff based on the news or topicality. And it is a story that needs to be retold again and again, because you look at the world now, and have we learned our lesson about who our neighbour is and helping out those people? It often feels not. And I clearly am saying blessed words here because the sun is shining on me as I say these.
On your divine countenance.
I'm just going to make sure I get the perfect hit my spot.
Yes, it is radiating. You're like Moses after he came down from the mountain.
Absolutely.
He's still glowing. We should put some angel music onto you. Oh.
Yeah. It's highlighting the wrinkles that lockdown has really touched on.
Nobody noticed them till you just pointed them out. So,
but as you said, that the fact that the words, you updated it with the cream on the face and that sort of thing. I often think, the stories that Jesus tells are, in this case, about carpentry. People often don't, comment that the plank and stuff is about carpentry. He's talking the language of his family. Calling the disciples, there's fishermen. He does stuff about fish. There are tales about going fishing. Sowing the seed, because he's speaking to farmers. He does the scattering of the seed, things like that. And I often wonder, the time that he was speaking to, those jobs generally endured for centuries. You speak to someone in the 1800s, and I often wonder if, I say often, I don't wake up daily thinking this, but the fact that the Bible resonated so much and Christianity resonated so much with so many people for so long, and really only in I know that obviously there are many things, everything from Darwin to Dawkins are extra factors in this, but people had those jobs. People were fishers and fishermen and carpenters and farmers up until the industrial world sort of kicked in, really.
And thereafter, none of this stuff. I was watching a documentary about the Industrial Revolution and canals. And there was a canal that was still transporting coal down to Liverpool until about 1980. You got a horse-drawn canal barge with coal in it. And so it is only really now where I think it's like, do we need a blessed are the PR consultants? And
exactly.
Jesus, is that, it just feels like, rather than consider the lilies, is it like consider the spreadsheet? It's like, it doesn't quite have the same ring to it though, does it?
Well, it doesn't. And the thing is, of course, you look at, but the lilies are still here. They're coming through now, whatever. It's just we ignore them. And BBC 4, and to try and calm us down in our lockdown nerves, has been showing us slow TV of a shepherd gathering his flock of sheep through Snowdonia or Scaffold Pike, I think it was actually. And it's lovely to see, and it's calming and relaxing. It feels like it's from another age. But these shepherds are still shepherding. People are still fishing. People are still farming. You look at the Bible and you think these stories that Jesus was telling 200 years ago were still speaking probably to a majority of people with similar agricultural jobs. And then a couple of centuries ago, we discovered new jobs. And now they say, of course, that our children will be growing up to have jobs that don't even exist or have a name yet. And so certainly when I was a kid, I was told, you could be this or you could be that. Generally, it was like you could be a lawyer or an accountant, or you're not part of this school. And but our kids now, they sort of say, well, you can do that to a degree, but there'll be jobs that they'll have or have available to them that we don't even know what they are yet. So just be adaptable. And as a result, a tale like this, of course, it just has an extra couple of levels of gap in it, I think, between the message said at the time and us going, oh yeah, just imagine a farmer, imagine someone scattering seed, all that sort of thing. One of my other interests I've been doing is the history of broadcasting, and I sort of vaguely knew this, but I'd sort of not fully clocked that until 1920, the word broadcast purely meant an adjective about how you scatter seed. Right. As in the parable of the sower, and you would scatter your seeds broadcast, as in far and wide. And then it's only in 1920, 1921, where people started saying, oh, we are now sending these telephonic messages, which was meant to be one-to-one, meant to be one person transmitting to another person. But they say, oh, yes, but by accident, the message is being sent broadcast to lots of people. And then suddenly someone had the idea like, oh, well, let's just keep doing it, but do radio and songs and sitcoms and things like that. And here we are. But So broadcasting as a thing, that's the broadcasters is a job now where actually, scattering seed broadcast, that's what he's talking about back there, sending the message of the gospel far and wide in a way that 200 years ago we could relate to, maybe in a very different way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and also I've been rediscovering for myself, it's not just the everydayness of sheep and carpentry and all that kind of stuff. We shouldn't be surprised at how everyday those are, because God has made the universe that way. I've been sort of discovering a form of theology called typology, in particular, and if you go right back to and I've been going through Genesis, really early chapters, really digging into them, and you discover, trees. There is a garden. There are two trees: tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life. So we shouldn't be surprised, and then we get the ark that's made out of wood, and then we get lots of references to the Genesis narrative in the temple and the carvings and the Ark of the Covenant, and then later on, when Jesus turns up, he's a carpenter. Oh, that's interesting. How does he die? On a tree. I mean, it's like, it's not because, well, there wasn't anything else around. It wouldn't have been the same if it had been polyurethane. It's not quite that. There is a symbolism to it that I think is intentional. And sheep have a meaning in Scripture beyond the fact that they're just out in the fields. And you really get that with the Christmas story, I guess, don't you? Where David is a shepherd, and out by the city of David, there are shepherds looking over their sheep. And there's a kind of a switch in the New Testament from the animal to fish, from meat to fish, and so you get the feeding of the 5,000 and stuff like that. So anyway, this is, people write very, very long books on it, and I've been sort of hacking my way through some of those.
I've not spotted the meat to fish changeover, but you're right. That's going to get me thinking now for a year about what's the pescatarian theology of this.
Well, it's always bothered me that when Jesus feeds the 5,000, it's not, because in obviously the bread is a reference to the manna in the desert, in the wilderness, where there are also quails. There's meat. There's birds, but in the feeding of 5,000, it's fish. So it's not necessarily what you would expect. There wasn't a boy with barley loaves and a couple of lamb cutlets, which then went out. It's fish, and so there's kind of and therefore it's something to do with, I think, the firmament and the sea, because the sea is the absolute beginning. The water at the beginning of Genesis has a real significance. I'm just sort of trying to get my. And I would say that we don't preach on this well because we don't want to make it complicated, but our congregations watch movies, and movies are all typology and symbolism.
Yeah. I reckon what it was, they were planning, I don't know how this works, forgive me theologically, but Jesus and God were planning the feeding of the 5,000, at night secretly. And they thought, do we make it a lamb, a buffalo? And they thought, but they're tricky to draw in a car. Let's make it a fish. That you can get one of those on the back by the number plate really easily, just a little swoosh.
Yeah. Well, I think you can make a little lamb cutlet also look quite good. But then nice. It doesn't spell ichthus, doesn't it? Doesn't spell Jesus Christ.
That's true.
Whatever the Greek is that ichthus stays for. But it could have done. That's. But anyway, just before we move off this, and I'll just ask you a little bit about your online comedy club that you've started. This passage goes on to one of my favourite little bits, where Jesus says, ask, it will be given to you, seek, you will find. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? And I love the way there's just this throwaway comment of you're evil, you wouldn't do that. Therefore, how much do you think? And you just imagine all these people standing there going, did he just...
A bit harsh. Okay,
it's all right. He's established that they're hypocrites as
true.
well. So in a way, it's not entirely surprising. But I love the throwaway comment of just who would give their son stone if they asked for bread? You guys wouldn't do that, would you? And you're evil.
That's someone who's got the crowd. At that point, you can say it what you like. You're fine.
That's the Stuart Lee moment there, isn't it? They're really eating out of the palm of his hand at that moment.
Almost literally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So talking about comedy clubs, you've been sort of doing online gigs in lockdown. Do you want to just tell me a little bit about those?
Well, it's one of those things that I in a way I've done it reluctantly, because I normally do 3 gigs a
Unaccustomed
week.
as I am to public speaking.
Well, I know, but in a way, and I look at actually in envy at some of those envy. Is that a biblical sin? Oh, that's Dante. It's fine. Yeah, I look at envy at comedians who've just gone, you know what? I'm just going to not do anything. I have some time off, and not do online stuff. But I did it. I did it for Spring Harvest Festival in spring 2020. And it was quite almost, I don't want to say baptism of fire, because again, these words are loaded, but because suddenly I was working out how to do online gigs for the first time, and because it's Spring Harvest, lots of people come, and it was several thousand at one point watching, and you think this is like doing an open mic gig at Wembley Arena, and the comments are going past so quickly. You want to look at the comments, but it's just too many. So I said, okay, I'll do it again next week, but on my Facebook page. And of course, 10 people turn up because you haven't got the weight of a huge festival behind you. And in a way, I sort of kept thinking, it's a bit like when I did stand-up, actually. I kept thinking this gig can't be my last because I've not nailed it yet. I need to kind of work a bit harder. And so I kept thinking, we'll get it right next week. We'll come back. And then it reached the point where I thought, okay, it's kind of good fun, and it's not so much comedy, it's more fun and games. And I do some, online game cut things and a little quiz and a couple of funny stories, partly also for my own stand-up set, keep a bit of practice in there. And also just a bit of reaching out to people. And very quickly it realized we haven't got many people who tune. We've got 50, 60, 70 or something, but they're regulars, and they turn up and they're on the chat. Oh, I'm here, I'm a bit late. Have you saved a seat for me? And all that sort of nonsense. And they're really sweet, and I know now that if I sort of stop, then a lot of them go, oh, but we look forward to that on a Monday. So it's a bit of more of a community now than a comedy club. But either way, it's just a reaching out thing. And it's certainly not the same. So you can't hear laughs, which is partly why I've stopped doing jokes on it as such, and just doing sort of the odd funny story and some fun and games, really. But at a time like this, you just make the best of it, don't you?
You do. But actually, I mean, again, if it's like having a podcast as well, or a YouTube channel, if you had 50 people turn up to your regular comedy club, you'd be happy with that, wouldn't you? I mean, obviously you'd make a bit more money off it, but you used to run comedy clubs like for real, didn't you? And if you'd have settled for 50 every time turning up, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. I think the thing is, I'd settle for 50 turning up if they all paid £7-8 a go.
Right.
And in this online world, it's I've got about 4 or 5, I always sort of say put the virtual hat around, and maybe 5 people put their hand in the pocket, and I appreciate that very much. Out of the other 45 or so, I know many who they've lost jobs and things, and they can't afford to, and absolutely, I fully get that. It's tough old times. So and either way, then you feel a bit mercenary, thinking, is there a threshold below which, like, oh well, if I only get £2 this week, I won't. In fact, a couple of weeks, no one's chipped in. You think, well, will I go back next week? Yeah, I think I probably will. So it's not just about the work in a way. It's about doing a thing for people. And as I said, people who sort of look forward to it, a bit of and a lot of them are shielding at home on their own and things like that. So it's sort of a chance to connect with people a bit.
Brilliant. Well, how can people find out about that?
It's on my Facebook page. Paul Kerensa is my name. I suppose if you search for that on Facebook, facebook.com/paul.kerensa. It's every Monday at 7:30 we do that. And it's in theory every week. Although, it depends if the Prime Minister does a message, I'll let him take over, because I think people watch that. But and it's fun. And in the meantime, we'll get back out there at some point and do some gigs again.
Well, talking of which, let's just round off by talking about your book up there.
Oh, yes.
Pointing out there.
I'm looking behind me. It's not there.
So a comedian walks into a church. We'll just sort of finish off with this thought about how, you've done a lot of gigs in churches. Just tell us a little bit about that book, but also your experience of doing gigs in churches. When you're booked by a church, what are they hoping you're going to do? What are the audience terrified you're going to do? Is there finally a meeting of minds? Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, well, to paraphrase that Stuart Lee thing you were talking about, I do a similar thing where, actually, let me just say, first of all, when I first did gigs in churches, I wasn't very good at them. And the first few I did, we got away with it, but it wasn't comedy by any means, really. And I sort of cracked it one day, I think, realizing that you just got to spend the first 5 minutes or so reassuring the audience. It's not like you need, your solid gold banker jokes straight in there. It's more important to just make them feel at ease and, not go in too strong, all that sort of thing. So I often start off at a normal church comedy night. I would do a couple of little jokes and things, and then I would get them to do. I say, okay, forget people don't necessarily want to join in and cheer. So give us a light hum, a nice Christian hum. If you are a regular at this church, and you get a nice solid hum. And then you go, okay, just like hum if you are being dragged here, that sort of thing, and so on. And you get a bit of that, and then you can do a bit with that. And then also acoustically, it sounds lovely as well because they all pick different notes. And it's just a way of also just reassuring people it's okay if you've been dragged here, because I said, and I often say it out loud that the fact is, I've got people who've been dragged here thinking, I hope it's funny and not too twee. And you've got the churchgoers thinking, I hope it's not rude. And you're trying to keep both lots happy is
I hope
tricky.
it's quite twee.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a little in the Venn diagram. It's tricky. And in fact, the follow up to that book that you've got there, I did a book called Genesis: The Bible Bluffer's Guide, trying to retell the book of Genesis humorously. And I think it's been long enough now. I can say it didn't sell brilliantly because there's such a narrow margin of people I was trying to reach who half the audience thought, oh, it looks like he's preaching. And the other half thought it looks like he's taking liberties with the Bible here and having a laugh at its expense.
Right.
And I suppose I was after that narrow strip of people who are happy to be, spoken to about the Bible, but in a humorous way. Yeah. And that can be tricky. So, and same with the church gigs, it can be tricky. Once you get them all just going, it's going to be fine, go with it, then it generally is.
Yeah, context, framing, it's all about that, isn't it, really?
It is.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. So if people go to paulkerensa.com, they're not going to go too far wrong, are they, really?
Pretty much. It's all there, all the other bits and pieces I'm doing as well. And,
brilliant.
Cool. It's all there.
And one day you will be released back into the wild and people can see you in person.
Exactly. Like I said, I don't know if I want to go, really. I've been quite used to it's been a really easy commute to get to gigs in the last wee while. But no, I look forward to actual, real, live, in-person laughter again, even if socially distanced and behind masks and perspex and who knows what.
Brilliant. Well, at some point you will emerge blinking into the daylight, although you're actually doing that already pretty well, actually.
Absolutely, pretty much. Yeah.
Paul, thanks so much for joining us on The Sacred Art of Joking.
Thank you. A salute again for you.
And I've got to wave because it's Zoom. Ah. Thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed that, then you'll probably enjoy my new book, The Gospel According to a Sitcom Writer. You can get it by clicking the links below. Speak to you next time.